They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it's best served in a diamond-encrusted dress with a smile that cuts deeper than a knife. Vesper gave everything to Grant, her youth, her ideas, her dignity, only to be thrown out like yesterday's trash for a younger, flashier model. He thought he broke her. He thought she would fade into the shadows. He was wrong. 5 years later, she walked right past him at the most exclusive gala in New York, and the best part, he didn't even recognize the woman he destroyed. But he was about to find out exactly who she was, and it was going to cost him everything. Stay tuned, because this karmic justice is going to leave you breathless. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to erase the city. But for Vesper, standing on the marble steps of the sprawling estate she used to call home, the rain was the least of her problems. Her Louis Vuitton luggage fake, because Grant had cut off her credit cards 3 weeks ago, was soaking wet. The heavy oak door opened, but it wasn't Grant standing there. It was Tiffany. Tiffany was 23, a bottle blonde with ambition that outpaced her intellect, wearing a silk robe that Vesper had purchased for herself 6 months prior. Tiffany leaned against the doorframe, smirking, holding a glass of Pinot Grigio. "Grant's busy, sweetie," Tiffany purred, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "He said the lawyers sent over the papers. Why are you still here?" Vesper tightened her grip on the handle of her suitcase. She was 32, but in this moment she felt ancient. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity. She was wearing sweatpants because none of her society clothes fit her after the stress-eating of the last year, and her face was puffy from crying. She looked nothing like the vibrant, sharp marketing genius who had helped Grant build Apex Innovations from a garage startup into a tech giant. "I need to speak to my husband, Tiffany," Vesper said, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to sound strong. "This is still my house until the divorce is final." "Actually," a deep voice boomed from the hallway. Grant appeared behind his mistress, looking every inch the tech mogul in a bespoke suit. He didn't look at Vesper with anger. He looked at her with boredom. "The prenup you signed, the one you didn't have a lawyer read, because you trusted me, states that in the event of infidelity, which you can't prove, or irreconcilable differences, which I can prove, you vacate the premises immediately upon request. I'm requesting." Vesper felt the air leave her lungs. "Infidelity. Grant, you are the one living with her while we are still married." Grant chuckled, taking a sip from Tiffany's glass. "Perception is reality, Viv, and right now, the reality is that you're unstable. You've let yourself go, and you're causing a scene. My security team is on the way. You have 5 minutes to get off the property." "I built Apex with you," she whispered, the rain mixing with the tears on her face. "The algorithm, that was my code. The branding, that was my design. You were nothing but a charismatic face." Grant's expression hardened. He stepped out onto the porch, towering over her. "And now you're nothing. Look at you. You're a mess. Who would believe that a frumpy, washed-up housewife invented the core tech of $1 billion company? Take the settlement check. It's enough to rent a studio apartment in the bad part of town and disappear. Do it for your own dignity." He turned back to Tiffany, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Come inside, babe. It's cold out here." The door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. Vesper stood there for a long time. She looked at the closed door, the symbol of the life she had poured her soul into. She had supported him when they were eating instant noodles. She had stayed up for 3 days straight, debugging his code before the initial IPO launch. She had sacrificed her figure, her sleep, and her own career ambitions to make him a king. And now the king had locked the gates. She dragged her wet suitcase down the long driveway. Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from her bank app. Deposit alert, $5,000. The memo line read, "For the Uber. G. $5,000. That was her severance package for 10 years of marriage and building an empire. She reached the street, shivering. A black puddle splashed onto her sneakers as a car drove by. She looked at her reflection in a darkened shop window across the street. Grant was right. She looked defeated. She looked like a victim. Never again. She whispered, her voice cracking. She wiped the rain from her eyes, smearing mascara across her cheek. You want me to disappear, Grant? Fine. I'll disappear. But when I come back, you won't even know what hit you. The studio apartment in the bad part of town wasn't an exaggeration. It was a basement unit in a crumbling building 3 hours away from their old estate. It smelled of mold and stale cigarettes. For the first month, Vesper did exactly what Grant expected her to do. She fell apart. She laid in bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, replaying the humiliation over and over. She saw Tiffany's smirk. She heard Grant's dismissal. You're nothing. But rock bottom has a basement, and Vesper found it when she went to the grocery store to buy bread and saw a magazine cover at the checkout stand. Tech Visionary of the Year. Grant Sterling on the future of AI. There he was, smiling his winning smile. And next to him in a sidebar photo was Tiffany, captioned as Head of Creative Design. Tiffany couldn't even match her socks, let alone design a brand identity. That title, that was Vesper's job. That was Vesper's life. Something inside her snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a fusion. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard fury. Vesper went back to her basement. She walked into the tiny bathroom and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. She was 30 pounds overweight. Her skin was dull, and her eyes were dead. Okay, she said to the reflection. Step 1, the vessel. She took the $5,000 Uber money Grant had thrown at her. Most people would have saved it for rent. Vesper invested it in herself. She joined a 24-hour gym, not for the amenities, but because it was cheaper than therapy. She started running. First a block, then a mile, then 10. She cut her own hair, chopping off the frizzy, damaged locks into a sleek, sharp bob that framed her jawline. She dyed it a deep raven black, far from the mousy brown Grant had always insisted she keep, because it looked homely. But the physical change was just the armor. The real weapon was her mind. Vesper knew the tech industry. She knew Grant's code better than he did, because she had written the patches for it. She knew Apex Innovations had a flaw. It relied heavily on user data aggregation, a model that was becoming legally precarious with new privacy laws. She needed to build something that would make Apex obsolete. She spent her nights coding on a refurbished laptop she bought at a pawn shop. She survived on eggs and spinach. She didn't date. She didn't socialize. She became a ghost. 6 months later, Vesper was unrecognizable. She had dropped the weight not because she wanted to be skinny for a man, but because she wanted to be fast. Her body was lean muscle. Her skin glowed from hydration and sheer determination. But she needed capital. Her code, a decentralized, privacy-first AI protocol she named Nemesis, was brilliant, but without funding it was just lines on a screen. She changed her name. Vesper Sterling was dead. She went back to her grandmother's maiden name. She was now Vesper Vance. She began attending tech mixers, but not as the wife of a CEO. She went as a ghost consultant. She wore thrifted suits. She tailored herself to look like Armani. She wore a mask of absolute confidence. It was at a venture capital mixer in San Francisco, where she met Preston Cole. Preston was old money. Real money. The kind of money that didn't need to shout. He was in his 40s, silver-haired with eyes that saw everything. He was the head of Cole Global Ventures. Grant had been trying to get a meeting with Preston for 5 years and had failed every time. Vesper spotted him in the corner of the room, looking bored while a young tech bro pitched him a crypto scam. She waited for her moment. When the tech bro left, Vesper walked up. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't smile. "Your portfolio is heavy on consumer data," she said, her voice low and smooth. "When the new privacy legislation passes in the EU next month, you're going to lose 15% of your valuation overnight." Preston looked up, intrigued. "And who are you?" "An analyst." "I'm the person who can save that 15%, Vesper said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "This is Nemesis. It solves the privacy bottleneck. It doesn't scrape data. It synthesizes it. It's the jagged pill that Apex Innovations can't swallow." Preston picked up the drive. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the sharp suit, the raven hair, the eyes that burned with intelligence and something darker. "Apex is the market leader," Preston noted. "Grant Sterling is a shark." "Grant Sterling is a thief who thinks he's a genius," Vesper corrected calmly. "And sharks suffocate if they stop moving. I've built a net." Preston smiled, a genuine, rare smile. "Meet me tomorrow, 8:00 a.m. Don't be late, Miss Vance," she said. "Vesper Vance." That meeting changed everything. Preston didn't just invest. He became a partner. He recognized genius when he saw it. Over the next 3 years, working in stealth mode, they built Nemesis into a juggernaut. They operated in the shadows. No press releases, no public photos of the CEO, just pure, unadulterated market disruption. Vesper had money now. Serious money. She moved into a penthouse overlooking the bay, one that looked down on the hills where Grant lived. She bought a wardrobe that cost more than Grant's car. She hired a team of stylists, not to make her look beautiful, but to make her look formidable. Then came the invitation. It was the Global Tech Gala in New York. The Oscars of the tech world. Grant Sterling was the keynote speaker. He was rumored to be unveiling Apex's new acquisition strategy. Preston walked into Vesper's office, holding the gold-embossed invitation. "We're invited," Preston said. "As Nemesis Systems. It's time to come out of stealth mode, Viv. Are you ready?" Vesper turned her chair around. She was wearing a blood-red dress that fit like a second skin. Her makeup was flawless. She looked nothing like the crying woman in the rain. She looked like a queen waiting for an execution. "Is Grant going to be there?" she asked. "He's the guest of honor," Preston replied, "and rumor has it he's bringing his fiancée." Vesper smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Good," she said. "I'd hate to ruin his night without an audience." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties, designer gowns, and superficial laughter. This was the ecosystem where Grant thrived. He stood near the champagne fountain, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a crystal flute. He looked distinguished, successful, and utterly bored. Clinging to his arm was Tiffany. She was wearing a neon pink dress that was far too loud for the occasion, covered in sequins that caught the light aggressively. She was scrolling through Instagram on her phone, ignoring the billionaires around her. "Put the phone away," Grant hissed, smiling through his teeth at a passing investor. "You're representing Apex. Try to look like you understand what's happening. Tiffany rolled her eyes, snapping her gum. Chill, Grant. I'm posting a story. My followers need to see the fit. Besides, this is boring. When can we leave? Grant sighed, taking a heavy swig of champagne. He missed the days when he had a partner who could work a room. Vesper used to charm investors with witty banter and deep industry knowledge. She would have known exactly who to talk to and who to avoid. Tiffany, on the other hand, thought networking meant tagging people in photos. Suddenly the room went quiet. It wasn't a gradual silence. It was a hush that swept across the crowd like a wave. Grant turned toward the grand staircase. The photographers at the entrance had stopped shouting and started clicking frantically. At the top of the stairs stood a woman who looked like she had been carved out of moonlight and danger. She wore the blood-red gown Vesper had chosen, a structured architectural masterpiece that hugged her curves and trailed behind her like a royal train. Her raven hair was slicked back, revealing a face of striking angular beauty. Her lips were painted a deep crimson. On her arm was Preston Cole, the most elusive venture capitalist in the valley. "Who is that?" Tiffany asked, looking up from her phone, her jealousy instant and palpable. "That," Grant said, his eyes fixed on the woman, "is Preston Cole. But I don't know who the woman is." He felt a stir in his chest he hadn't felt in years. She was magnificent. She radiated power. She walked down the stairs with a slow, predatory grace, looking directly ahead, acknowledging no one. Grant straightened his tie. "Stay here," he told Tiffany. "What? No, I'm coming with you," Tiffany whined, grabbing his arm. "Fine. Just don't speak," Grant muttered. He maneuvered them through the crowd, determined to intercept Preston and his mystery companion. As the couple reached the bottom of the stairs, Grant stepped into their path with his signature charming smile. Grant boomed, extending a hand. "I haven't seen you since the Davos summit. Good to see you." Preston stopped. He looked at Grant's hand, then up at his face, his expression cool. "Grant, it's been a while." Grant turned his gaze immediately to the woman in red. Up close, she was even more breathtaking. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and oddly familiar, though he couldn't place why. They held a cold amusement that unsettled him. "And you must introduce me to your lovely companion," Grant said, his voice dropping an octave, turning on the charm. The woman smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Grant, this is my business partner," Preston said, emphasizing the word. "The CEO of Nemesis Systems. You can call her V." "V," Grant repeated, testing the name. A mysterious name for a stunning woman. "Nemesis. I've heard whispers. You're the ones making noise about the new privacy protocols." "We don't make noise, Mr. Sterling," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, like velvet over gravel. It sent a shiver down Grant's spine. "We make solutions, something I hear Apex is currently struggling to find." Grant laughed, a defensive sound. "Apex is doing just fine. We're actually looking for acquisitions. Perhaps we should discuss bringing Nemesis under our umbrella. I could show you the ropes." Tiffany, feeling ignored, stepped forward and looked the woman up and down. "I like your dress," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "Is it vintage? It looks old." Grant winced. Vesper turned her gaze to Tiffany. She looked at the younger woman, not with anger, but with the kind of pity one might have for a slow child. "It's custom," Vesper said softly. "Alexander McQueen, and you must be Tiffany, the head of creative design." Tiffany beamed, missing the sarcasm. "Yeah, that's me." "I've seen your work on the new interface," Vesper continued, her eyes locking back onto Grant's. It's very colorful. It reminds me of a kindergarten finger painting project. Bold choice for a Fortune 500 company. Grant stiffened. It was a direct insult, but it was delivered with such elegance he couldn't even be mad. In fact, it turned him on. He realized in that moment how much he despised Tiffany's intellect, or lack thereof. "We are in a transition phase," Grant said, quickly stepping in front of Tiffany. "Look, V, I'd love to buy you a drink. Discuss business. Real business." Vesper checked her watch, a diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe that cost more than Grant's house. "I'm afraid my dance card is full tonight, Grant," she said. She used his first name with a familiarity that made him pause. "But Preston and I are hosting a private game of poker in the VIP suite later. High stakes. If you think you can handle the buy-in, you're welcome to join." She leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. He smelled her perfume, sandalwood, and black rose. It triggered a deep-buried memory he couldn't access. "Bring your checkbook," she whispered. "You're going to need it." She pulled back, gave him one last enigmatic smile, and walked away, leaving Grant Sterling staring after her, completely captivated. "She's a bitch," Tiffany spat. "She's brilliant," Grant murmured. "And I'm going to have her." The VIP suite was dimly lit, smelling of expensive cigars and leather. A round table sat in the center, occupied by 3 other tech magnates, Preston Cole and the woman known as V. Grant walked in alone. He had sent Tiffany back to the hotel room, telling her he had boring board stuff to do. The truth was, he didn't want her embarrassing him in front of V. Grant took the empty seat opposite Vesper. She was shuffling a deck of cards with the dexterity of a magician. She had removed her diamond earrings, placing them on the table as if they were loose change. "You came," she said, not looking up. "I never back down from a challenge," Grant replied, loosening his tie. "What's the game?" "Texas Hold'em," Preston said from the side. "But we're not playing for pennies, Grant. The buy-in is $5 million. Grant didn't blink. Apex was cash poor at the moment, due to the legal battles over data privacy, but he had personal reserves. "Deal me in." For the first hour they played back and forth. Grant was a good player, aggressive, bullying the other players with large raises. But Vesper played differently. She was patient. She folded hand after hand, watching him studying his tics. She knew his tell. She remembered it from their marriage. When Grant was bluffing, he would unconsciously tap his ring finger against the table. When he had a strong hand, he would become perfectly still. He had no idea she was reading him like a children's book. By midnight, the other players had folded out, leaving only Grant and Vesper. A mountain of chips sat in the center. "So," Grant said, leaning back, "let's cut the cards and talk shop. Nemesis, I want it. I'm willing to offer you a buyout. 50 million. Vesper laughed softly. 50 million. Grant, my algorithm is the only thing that can save your platform from being banned in the European Union next month. You know it, and I know it. Your stock is down 20% this quarter. You're bleeding." Grant's smile faltered. "We have contingencies." "You have nothing," she countered sharply. "Your head of creative is designing logos in Paint, and your dev team is jumping ship because you fired your lead architect 5 years ago. What was her name?" "The wife." Grant froze. "How do you know about that?" "People talk," Vesper said smoothly. "They say she was the brains, and when you got rid of her, the innovation stopped." "She was a drag." Grant snapped, his voice rising. She didn't have the vision. I built Apex. Me. Then prove it, Vesper challenged. She pushed all her chips into the center. All in. Grant looked at his hand. He had a full house kings over tens. It was a monster hand. He looked at Vesper. She was perfectly still. She has nothing, he thought. She's trying to bully me. I call, Grant said, pushing his chips forward. But I'm short 10 million on the pot. I don't take IOUs, Vesper said coldly. But I will take collateral. What do you want? If I win, Vesper said, her eyes locking onto his. I want all of them. The room went silent. Preston stopped drinking his scotch. Are you insane? Grant laughed nervously. That's my company. That's billions. The company is currently under investigation by the SEC and facing a ban in Europe, Vesper reminded him. It's a sinking ship. If you win, you get Nemesis, the patch that saves the ship, and my pot of 50 million cash. If you lose, I take the helm. Grant looked at his cards again. Full house. The only thing that could beat him was 4 of a kind or a straight flush. The odds of her having that were astronomical. She was bluffing. She had to be. He looked at her face. She was beautiful, arrogant, and looking at him with a challenge that ignited his ego. He couldn't let a woman beat him. Not now. Not ever. Fine, Grant snarled. We write it up now on a napkin. They scribbled the contract. Preston signed as a witness. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Show them, Grant demanded, flipping his cards over triumphantly. Kings full of tens. Read 'em and weep, sweetheart. Vesper didn't flinch. She reached out with a manicured hand and slowly flipped her cards. The 4 of diamonds. The 5 of diamonds. The 6 of diamonds. The 7 of diamonds. The 8 of diamonds. A straight flush. Grant stared at the cards. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Unlucky, Vesper whispered. She stood up, towering over him as he slumped in his chair. The lawyers will be in touch tomorrow to transfer the assets, she said, picking up her clutch. You cheated, Grant stammered, his hands shaking. Who are you? Who are you? Vesper walked to the door, then stopped. She turned back, the shadows of the room hiding her eyes. You really don't recognize me, do you, Grant? She asked, her voice dropping the sultry affectation and returning to the natural, clear tone she had used 10 years ago in their kitchen. Grant squinted. The voice, the way she stood. It's amazing what a little dye and a lot of money can do, she said. But the code, you should have recognized the code in Nemesis. It's based on the kernel I wrote for you on our honeymoon. Grant's eyes went wide. Horror, pure and absolute, washed over him. Vesper, he choked out. She smiled, and this time it was a smile of pure, terrifying victory. Hello, husband. I believe you're sitting in my chair. The morning sun hit the glass facade of Apex Innovations like a spotlight, but inside the boardroom on the 50th floor, the mood was darker than a tomb. Grant sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his head in his hands. He hadn't slept. He was still wearing his tuxedo from the night before, the bow tie undone and hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. Across from him sat Vesper. She looked fresh, revitalized, wearing a sharp white power suit that made her look like an avenging angel. Next to her was Preston Cole and a phalanx of corporate lawyers. This is ridiculous, Grant muttered, his voice raspy. It was a poker game, a friendly wager. You can't enforce a napkin contract in a court of law. No judge will uphold the transfer of $1 billion corporation based on a hand of cards. Preston Cole slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a video recording. Nevada law is very specific about gambling debts, Grant, Preston said calmly. And since the game was hosted in a private suite, registered to a Nevada LLC, and we have video evidence of you explicitly agreeing to the terms while sober, we checked your blood alcohol level via the breathalyzer you insisted on using to prove you were sharp. It is entirely binding. Furthermore, you looked at the video. He saw himself arrogant and sneering, saying, "I felt sick." "I can fight this," Grant threatened, standing up, though his legs were shaky. "I'll tie this up in litigation for decades. I'll burn the company to the ground before I let you have it." Vesper finally spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You don't have decades, Grant. You don't even have hours." She tapped a folder in front of her. "While you were hyperventilating in the bathroom, I had my team audit the Apex servers. We found the creative accounting you've been using to hide the losses from the failed VR project. We had dividends to pay for Tiffany's shopping sprees." Grant froze. His face went grey. That's not true," he whispered. "It is," Vesper continued. "And I have two options. Option A, I release this file to the SEC and the FBI. You go to federal prison for embezzlement and fraud for 20 years. Option B, you sign the transfer papers, resign effectively immediately for health reasons, and walk away. You stay out of prison, but you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back." The silence in the room was deafening. Grant looked at the lawyers. They looked away. He looked at Preston. Preston looked bored. He looked at Vesper. She looked unstoppable. He realized then that he had never really known her. He thought she was weak because she was kind. He didn't realize that kindness was a choice, and she had simply made a different choice today. With a trembling hand, Grant picked up the pen. He signed the papers. "Get out of my chair," Vesper said. Grant stood up. He felt like a ghost in his own life. He walked toward the door, but Vesper called out one last thing. "Oh, and Grant, I'm calling an all-hands meeting in 10 minutes to announce the leadership change. You might want to leave through the back exit. The press is already in the lobby." As Grant fled the room, Vesper stood up and walked to the head of the table. She sat down in the leather chair that had been denied to her for so long. She spun it around to face the window, looking out over the city she had helped build, finally claiming her throne. Down in the creative department, Tiffany was sitting on her desk, applying lip gloss, waiting for Grant to arrive so they could go to brunch. She hadn't heard from him all night and was annoyed. Suddenly the intercom buzzed. "Attention all Apex staff. Please gather in the main atrium for an emergency announcement from the new CEO." "New CEO?" Tiffany frowned. "What is Grant talking about?" She sashayed down to the atrium, pushing her way to the front. The room was packed with hundreds of whispering employees. Then the elevator doors opened. Grant didn't step out. Vesper did. A gasp went through the crowd. The older employees, the engineers and coders who had been there since the garage days, recognized her instantly. Is that Vesper?" someone whispered. "My God, she looks incredible." Vesper stepped up to the microphone. "Good morning," she said, her voice projecting strength and calm. "For those who don't know me, my name is Vesper Vance. I am the co-founder of the technology that powers this company. For a long time, I was silent. But as of CEO of Apex Innovations..." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Tiffany stood frozen, her mouth open. "We are making some immediate changes," Vesper announced, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Tiffany. We are returning to a meritocracy. We are cutting the dead weight. She pointed directly at Tiffany. Security, please escort Ms. Tiffany out of the building. Her position as head of creative design is terminated effective immediately due to lack of qualification. The entire room turned to look at Tiffany. Her face flushed a deep, humiliating red. "You can't do this," Tiffany shrieked. "My boyfriend owns this company." "Your boyfriend," Vesper said into the mic, her voice echoing through the hall, "just signed it over to his ex-wife to stay out of jail. Goodbye, Tiffany." Two large security guards, one of whom Vesper recognized as Big Mike, a man she used to bring homemade cookies to, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, miss," Mike said, not looking sorry at all. "You have to go." As Tiffany was dragged out, screaming and kicking, the room erupted into applause. It started with the engineers, then the marketing team, and soon the entire building was cheering. They weren't just cheering for the new boss. They were cheering for justice. Vesper watched them go, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. But she wasn't done yet. Grant was still out there, and he still had the house. Grant drove his Porsche like a maniac, swerving through traffic to get to the estate. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard, his knuckles were white. He had lost the company. He had lost his reputation. But he still had the mansion. It was in his name alone, or so he thought. He had millions in art and jewelry in the safe. If he could just grab the passports and the diamonds, he could flee to the Caymans before the reality of his bankruptcy hit the banks. He screeched into the driveway, skidding on the gravel. He ran to the front door, jamming his key into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again. Nothing. He pounded on the door. "Tiffany, open the damn door." The door opened, but it wasn't Tiffany. It was a locksmith in blue coveralls. "Can I help you, buddy?" the locksmith asked. "Who are you?" "Get out of my house." Grant pushed past him into the foyer. The foyer was chaos. Movers were already there. They were taking paintings off the walls. They were rolling up the Persian rugs. "Hey, put that down!" Grant screamed at a mover holding a Ming vase. "That's mine." "Actually," a voice drifted down from the top of the stairs. "It's part of the marital assets liquidation." Grant looked up. Vesper was descending the staircase slowly, methodically. She had changed out of her suit into casual jeans and a cashmere sweater, an echo of the comfortable clothes she used to wear, but upgraded to luxury. "What are you doing here?" Grant gasped. "The house wasn't in the bet." "No," Vesper agreed, reaching the bottom step. "But the divorce settlement was never finalized, remember? You kicked me out, but you never signed the final decree because you were too busy partying with Tiffany. That means this is still community property." She held up a document. "And since you just admitted to federal fraud to avoid prison, the judge granted an emergency motion this morning. I get the house. You get the debt." Grant fell to his knees. The marble floor was cold, just as cold as it had been for Vesper 5 years ago. "You can't do this to me, Viv." He pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm your husband. I'm the love of your life. We can fix this. I can change. I'll dump Tiffany. I'll do whatever you want." Vesper looked down at him. She didn't see a monster anymore. She just saw a pathetic, small man. "You already dumped Tiffany," Vesper said dryly. "She called me 10 minutes ago trying to sell me your text messages for tabloid money. I told her I wasn't interested." She crouched down so she was eye level with him. "And as for being the love of my life, you were. And you killed that woman. You left her in the rain with $5,000 and a broken heart. You told her she was nothing. She stood up and signaled to the security guards waiting by the door. You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises, she said, echoing his words from 5 years ago perfectly. My security team is here. Take what you can carry in your hands. Do it for your own dignity. Grant looked around. His empire was gone. His lover was gone. His home was gone. He scrambled to his feet. He ran to the living room and grabbed a silver picture frame. It was a photo of him receiving an award. He grabbed a bottle of scotch from the bar. Time's up, the guard said, grabbing Grant by the arm. They dragged him to the door. Grant kicked and screamed, a flailing mess of limbs and desperation. Vesper, please. The door slammed shut in his face. Grant stood on the porch. It wasn't raining this time. The sun was shining brightly. Birds were chirping. The world was beautiful. But for Grant, it was the darkest day of his life. He walked down the long driveway, clutching his bottle of scotch and his picture frame. He reached the heavy iron gates. A taxi was waiting there. The window rolled down. Uber for Grant, the driver asked. Grant stared at the car. I didn't call an Uber, he mumbled. Ride's already paid for, the driver said. Lady inside sent it. She added a note. The driver handed Grant a notification on his phone. The note read, For the ride to the bottom. V. Grant looked back at the house one last time. He saw a silhouette in the window watching him. He got into the taxi. Where to? The driver asked. Grant realized he had nowhere to go. No friends. No family he hadn't alienated. No money. Just drive, Grant whispered. Drive away from here. Inside the house, Vesper watched the car disappear around the bend. She didn't feel the rush of joy she expected. She felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The balance had been restored. The debt was paid. She turned away from the window and looked at the empty foyer. It was a blank canvas. Okay, she said to the empty room. Time to redecorate. 1 year had passed since the night of the gala, but for Vesper, it felt as though an entire lifetime had elapsed between that evening and the present morning. The towering glass structure in downtown Seattle, once the monolithic shrine to Grant's ego, known as Apex Innovations, had undergone a complete metamorphosis. The cold, sterile chrome and aggressive red branding were gone. In their place, soft silver letters gleamed against the skyline, spelling out a new name, Vantage Systems. The rebrand was more than just a cosmetic change. It was a declaration. Vesper had gained the vantage point, the high ground, and she intended to govern from it with a clarity Grant had never possessed. Inside the building, the atmosphere had shifted from a sweatshop of fear to a hive of inspired activity. The bro culture that had once permeated the hallways where ideas were shouted down and credit was stolen had been surgically removed. Vesper had replaced the foosball tables and beer taps with quiet zones, ergonomic workstations, and a heavily subsidized childcare center. She sat in the corner office on the 50th floor, the same room where Grant had once told her she was nothing. The space was unrecognizable now. She had stripped away the dark mahogany paneling and heavy leather furniture that smelled of cigars and insecurity. The room was now an oasis of cream tones, warm gold accents and vibrant green plants that thrived in the natural light flooding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Vesper swiveled her chair, tracing the upward curve of the analytics graph displayed on her tablet. Profits were up 40%, year over year. The European market had not only accepted the Nemesis protocol, but had adopted it as the new gold standard for data privacy. The lawsuits that had threatened to sink the company under Grant's leadership had been settled not with bribes, but with transparency. There was a soft knock on the door, interrupting the hum of the city below. "Come in," Vesper called out, her voice carrying a natural authority she no longer had to force. The door opened, and Big Mike stepped in. The former security guard who used to sneak Vesper through the back entrance when she brought Grant lunch was now wearing a tailored suit. Vesper had promoted him to head of campus safety 6 months ago, recognizing his loyalty when everyone else was jumping ship. "Ms. Vesper," Mike said, a genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "The car is ready downstairs, and Mr. Cole is waiting in the lobby. He said to tell you he's already checked the traffic, and you're 5 minutes ahead of schedule." "Thank you, Mike," Vesper beamed, standing up. She smoothed down her skirt. Gone were the severe armor-like power suits she had worn during the hostile takeover. Today she wore a structured dress in a soft, dusty rose. She didn't need to dress to intimidate anymore. She was the queen, and the kingdom was at peace. She took the private elevator down to the lobby. When the doors slid open, Preston Cole was standing near the reception desk, scrolling through his phone. He looked up immediately, his eyes locking onto hers with a warmth that still caught her off guard. Their relationship had evolved significantly over the last 12 months. It had begun as a strategic partnership forged in the fires of mutual ambition and revenge. But in the quiet moments after the victory, it had grown into a deep, steady companionship. They weren't married. Vesper wasn't sure if she ever wanted to sign a legally binding contract with a man again, but they were partners in every sense of the word. Preston didn't want to own her. He just wanted to stand beside her. "Ready for the national spotlight?" Preston asked, offering her his arm as they walked toward the glass doors. "As ready as I'll ever be," Vesper replied, taking his arm. "Do I look okay? The lighting on these talk shows is unforgiving." Preston stopped for a second, looking her over with serious, analytical eyes, before breaking into a grin. "You look like you own the place," which, incidentally, you do. They stepped out into the cool Seattle air. A small cluster of photographers was waiting, flashbulbs popping in a rhythmic staccato. Forbes had just named Vesper Businesswoman of the Decade, and the world was hungry for a glimpse of the woman who had risen from the ashes. She offered them a polite, confident wave before slipping into the back of the waiting limousine. 5 miles away, in a part of the city where the gleaming skyscrapers were just distant silhouettes, the atmosphere was very different. Grant Sterling sat in a cramped, windowless break room that smelled of stale coffee and microwave popcorn. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with an irritating, flickering hum that gave him a permanent headache. He looked 10 years older than his actual age. His hair, once thick and perfectly coiffed, was thinning rapidly and graying at the temples. He wasn't wearing a bespoke Italian suit. He was wearing a slightly ill-fitting blue polo shirt made of scratchy synthetic fabric. Pinned to his chest was a plastic name tag that read, "Grant, Tier 1 Support." Grant was currently employed at a third-rate IT help desk center. His days, which used to be filled with board meetings and power lunches, were now consumed by answering calls from angry customers who couldn't figure out how to reset their routers. It was a hellish, repetitive loop of, have you tried unplugging it and plugging it back in for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? He took a bite of a dry turkey sandwich, staring blankly at the cracked screen of his smartphone. It was his lunch break, strictly 30 minutes docked for lateness, and this was his only escape. He scrolled through his news feed, his thumb moving lethargically until he froze. There she was, A live stream was playing on the landing page of a major network. Vesper was being interviewed on the biggest midday talk show in America. The headline beneath the video read, "From Heartbreak to Hegemony, the Vesper Vance Story." Grant couldn't look away. She looked radiant. She was sitting in a plush armchair across from the host, laughing at a joke. Her head was thrown back, her throat exposed, her eyes sparkling with a genuine, unburdened joy that Grant hadn't seen in years. He plugged in his tangled earbuds, drowning out the break room chatter. "So Vesper," the host said, leaning in with admiration. "You took a company that was legally dead in the water facing SEC investigations and bankruptcy, and you turned it into a global empire in 12 months. Your story has become a legend in Silicon Valley. What was the secret? What drove you through that darkness?" Grant leaned closer to the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. He waited. He waited for the anger. He waited for her to say his name. He wanted her to tell the world that he was the villain, that her hatred for him was the fuel that kept her engine running. He needed to know that he still mattered, even if he was the monster in her story. Being the villain was better than being nothing. On the screen, Vesper paused. She looked directly into the camera lens. For a terrifying second, Grant felt like she was looking right through the phone, straight into his soul in the dingy break room. "I think," Vesper said softly, her voice crystal clear. "I finally realized that I didn't need anyone's permission to be great. I spent a long time trying to build someone else's castle, laying every brick with my own hands, hoping that one day they'd let me live in the tower. But I realized I'm a builder. I don't need to inherit a castle. I can build my own." The host nodded, enraptured. "And what about your ex-husband, the man who founded the original company?" "The rumors say the split was acrimonious. Do you have anything to say to him now, knowing he's watching?" Grant held his breath. His hands were shaking. "Say my name," he pleaded silently. "Curse me. Scream at me. Just acknowledge me." Vesper shrugged. It wasn't a gesture of malice. It was a look of genuine confusion, as if she was trying to recall the name of a distant acquaintance she met once at a party. "I don't really think about him," she said simply. The indifference in her tone cut deeper than any knife. "I hope he's found peace. But honestly, I'm too busy building the future to spend any time looking back at the past." She turned back to the host and smiled, effortless and dismissive. "Now I really want to talk about the new scholarship fund we're launching for underprivileged female coders." Grant stared at the phone as the interview moved on. The sandwich in his hand turned to ash in his mouth. She didn't hate him. She didn't love him. She didn't obsess over destroying him. He was irrelevant. He was a footnote in the biography of a woman he used to control. He was a ghost. The door to the break room banged open, startling him. Grant's manager, a 19-year-old kid named Tyler, who enjoyed his tiny amount of power a little too much, stuck his head in. "Hey, Sterling break's over," Tyler barked, tapping his watch. "I got 3 tickets on hold and 2 escalations. Get back on the headset, or I'm writing you up again." Grant looked at the manager, his eyes burning with unshed tears of humiliation. Then he looked back at the screen where the studio audience was giving Vesper a standing ovation. "I used to be a CEO." Grant mumbled the words, tasting bitter. "I used to be on that screen." "Yeah, and I used to be an astronaut," Tyler scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Quit daydreaming and get to work, Grant. This queue isn't going to clear itself." Grant secured a sound of total defeat. He slid his phone into his pocket, extinguishing the light of his old life. He stood up, brushed the crumbs from his cheap polo shirt, and walked back out to the floor. He sat down in his grey cubicle, put on his headset, and waited for the next angry voice to yell at him. That evening, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Seattle sky in bruising hues of violet orange and deep indigo. Vesper stood on the limestone balcony of her estate, the one she had reclaimed, the one she now owned free and clear. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the ocean. She held a glass of vintage Cabernet, watching the city lights flicker on one by one in the distance. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the rain soaking through her clothes on the day she was kicked out. She remembered the smell of mold in the basement apartment. She remembered the nights her eyes burned from coding Nemesis on a pawn shop laptop. She remembered the fear. She remembered the anger that had felt like a physical weight in her chest. It was all gone now. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a profound, quiet strength. She felt a warm hand on her shoulder. Preston stepped up beside her, draping a cashmere shawl over her shoulders to ward off the evening chill. "You okay?" he asked softly. "You seemed a little distant after the interview." Vesper leaned into his touch, resting her head against his shoulder. "I'm better than okay," she whispered, swirling the wine in her glass. "I realized something today." "What's that?" "I'm free," she said. "For a long time, everything I did was a reaction to him. My success was a weapon. But today I realized I didn't even care if he was watching. I didn't win because I destroyed him, Preston. I won because I became myself." She looked out at the city. Somewhere out there in the grid of lights, Grant was living the life he had earned. Somewhere, Tiffany was living hers. But here on this balcony, Vesper had built a life she deserved. She took a sip of the wine, tasting the rich, complex notes. She turned her back on the city, turning toward the warm, golden light spilling from the French doors of her living room. "Come on," she said, taking Preston's hand. "Let's go inside. It's getting cold out here." "After you," Preston said. As Vesper walked back into her home, she realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies. It was outgrowing them so completely that you forgot they were ever tall enough to cast a shadow over you. She had grown into a giant, and for the first time in her life, she was truly happy. And that is the incredible story of Vesper Vance. She proved that when life or a husband throws you out in the rain, you don't just drown, you learn to swim. Vesper didn't just get even. She got ahead. She turned her pain into power and her heartbreak into a billion-dollar empire, leaving the man who underestimated her in the dust of his own mediocrity. It's a powerful reminder to never let anyone else define your worth. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out to make room for the treasure. I want to know what you think. Did Grant get what he deserved? Or was his punishment too harsh? And what was your favorite moment of Vesper's revenge? Let this story of justice and transformation. Please story. We have plenty more drama, romance, and karma coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best revenge is massive success.